So thank you. Our amazing panelists are all here. Today we are so glad to have Grace, Sandalina, Brian, Jalen, Franklin, and Matt here with us. Um, I know that some students did talk about stigma being a transfer student getting into competitive industries such as accounting, banking, and consulting. So that's why we would have today's event. I would like to have our amazing panelists share their experience navigating the whole challenging recruiting process and hope to empower you guys to chase your dreams. All right, so first of all, we are going to welcome our panelists. I'll ask them to introduce themselves one by one. So just quick information about your name, graduation year, you've already an alum, and then talk about your current role. And then we would have a list of prepared questions, and then we would open up to audience question. Okay, so let's start with the A, so accounting. So Grace, you're up.
Hey everyone, my name is Grace Jung Lee. I graduated this past May, and I will be working as as an auditor full time at EY starting next week.
Great, thank you, Grace. So Sandalina.
Hi everybody, my name is Sandalina. I'm a transfer from the class of 2022, so I hope to be seeing some of you guys on campus in the fall. I'm currently a investment banking summer analyst at boutique bank Sawaya Partners, and I'm in week 9 of 10. So I'll let you guys know how it goes.
Thank you. Brian, who have been with us for a little longer.
Hi there. Hi, my name is Brian. I transferred into Haas last year, and this year I'm at Houlihan Lokey with their valuations team, doing a little bit of litigation type of work and general valuations. And yeah, so that's just a little bit about me, and I'm happy to go a little bit more in depth later on. But nice to meet everyone.
Great, thank you for being with us, Brian. And then Brian's firm is going to have a follow-up Connect events at 6 p.m. For those who are interested in investment banking, you don't want to miss it. All right, Jalen, you're up.
Hi guys, my name is Jalen, also a transfer in the same class as Sandalina and Brian from last year. And this upcoming summer, I'm going to be joining a firm called BC Partners, and I will be working with their credit practice.
Great, welcome, Jalen. So now we are moving to C, consulting. Matt.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt. I transferred in 2019, so I'm class of 2021. I currently work at Bain and trying to get something set up like the Houlihan Lokey thing, so we'll see. But also, super excited to talk to everyone. It's weird being on this side, I guess, like seeing all the names. So if you have availability to put your camera on, definitely would love to see more faces. That would be great.
That's a good idea. So if you can, feel free to turn on your camera. And Franklin.
Hi y'all, I'm Franklin. I'm a rising senior at Berkeley. I also transferred in with Sandalina, Brian, and Jalen. I'm currently a summer associate at EY Parthenon doing strategy consulting, more specifically like private equity due diligence and M&A strategy.
Thank you, Franklin. So you're in the East Coast, right? So it's a little late in the evening, so thank you very much for your time, for joining us. So I'll start with a question that is common for our students. So I know that with a Haas degree, you have a lot of career options. So how do you know what you wanted to focus professionally? I guess calling back to your junior year. Who want to go ahead and start? We don't need to follow the sequence for the introduction.
A really important piece of like understanding what I wanted to recruit for was talking with like as many people as possible. Really just to learn more about, because like you hear about accounting, banking, and consulting as like these large, like ambiguous and expansive like ideas, but there's a lot of nuance to each industry. And so like, I think that the best way to like unpack that nuance and understand like where you might be able to see yourself like fitting into that equation, and also like what types of opportunities those like different nuances could lead you toward. Like I think that talking with folks is like a really important piece of that, and of course has the like like consequential benefit of expanding your network, which is great. But I think that really just approaching like networking calls as like learning opportunities is a really like great place to start.
Great, thank you. And so we know that it's certainly going to help if you had the chance to talk to a lot of insiders. But for investment banking, it's particularly challenging because you pretty much need to recruit in the summer of your sophomore year. So I'd like to learn about Cinderlina and Brian and Jalen about your how do you find out that you want to do finance and in back in last year.
You wanna take that one first, Brian?
How about we have Sandalina go first, and then give me some time to think about it.
For sure, I got it. All right, so yeah, I think I've always known that I enjoyed finance. I didn't know what flavor of it specifically. So I knew in high school I really liked math, economics, business. At community college, I definitely gravitated towards those same subjects. And basically just figuring out what career paths are out there. To be completely honest with investment banking, you hear a lot about it, so you're exposed to it the most. There are lots of other types of finance out there, but because investment banking is kind of the one that I had heard the most about in high school and community college, it kind of drew my interest. I did learn about other sorts of finance careers, but I realized that for what I was looking for in terms of a learning experience, in terms of the exit opportunities after your analyst years, and just the trajectory, in addition to coffee chats and conversations Franklin touched upon, I realized it made sense. It aligned with my interests, aligned with my goals financially, and also just professionally. I will say that it was difficult. I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent really quickly, if that's okay. But I didn't know if I was going to be able to recruit for investment banking because it kind of depended on what school I received admission to. Because as we all know, there are target schools and there are non-target schools. Not to say that you are confined by the branding of your school, but that does play a role in recruiting. So once I got into Haas, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. So when I came into it as a transfer, I knew that I was already late. Just for reference, as some of you may know, some of the banks are opening up their applications a year and a half to a year in advance of the internship starting. So when you're coming in as a transfer in April, May, June, you are already late to the game. So I kind of had a bit of an emotional roller coaster navigating that. I actually came to a point where I gave up on banking, I want to say at the end of summer, and I stopped recruiting for it. And I just said, I'm not doing this. I'm going to do FP&A, which is another cool part of finance. FP&A at a big tech firm. I'll love it. Tesla, Facebook, that kind of thing. I ended up having a previous networking call from months ago randomly come up again. And that was kind of how I landed where I am today. But there's a lot of uncertainty and there are a lot of obstacles in the way. And you just really have to, if you want it bad enough, you have to keep going, or you can give up like I did, but hopefully the stars align.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I could follow up on that a little bit about the recruiting timeline. It definitely is a crunch, and recruiting a year and a half out in advance is actually kind of wild because it's hard for you to really understand what you like about banking or anything like finance related, or not even just like banking, like consulting too. When you're kind of a new student and you're like fresh to Haas and you're going through pre-core, and like you're going through like Sloan's and Fitch's class, you literally are just getting acquainted with the school and getting acclimatized. It's hard to even really understand what kind of a career you want to build for yourself. But specifically for investment banking, since that was pertaining to the question, there's so many different facets, like different product groups, like coverage groups and industry groups, and different sort of it's like sales and trading too, but it's not exactly IB, or corporate finance is not really IB as well, but they're all kind of in the periphery of this industry, that you really need to kind of find an answer for yourself before you even begin trying to recruit or like trying to network. I guess like networking will help you kind of figure out that answer too. But my point is, it's so multifaceted that like what Jalen is doing, like private credit, for example, is so esoteric that unless you're really digging, you will not find something like that kind of at face value. So I really think like the first step is to really talk to as many people as possible. And this panel is super helpful because there are people here that have taken, multiple different like paths to get to where they are. And for me, for example, I extended a semester in school in order to do kind of recruiting. So again, I'd be happy to talk a little bit more about that as well, and like what your options are as a transfer student.
Yeah, I think that was really helpful. Kind of just like piggybacking off of Brian, I also am taking an extra semester to recruit, or when I was recruiting, that's what I did. And I think something that's like not really paid attention to when people are going through recruitment, something that I didn't really think about at first, is just like having a good group of people around you. Because you do hear a lot about different opportunities that open up or interviews at different places. And I think just having like a solid group of people that you're going through recruitment with was really beneficial to me. And I don't think I could have done it without people like Brian and the other people that I went through recruitment with. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be paid attention to as well.
Thank you, Jalen. So Grace, accounting seems less popular nowadays compared with like, working in tech or other consulting or other options. So what would you say help you make your mind to pursue accounting?
Yeah, so for me, I wanted to do first I wanted to do marketing, but then I realized that I'm not much of a creative person as I think I am. And so I kind of fell into accounting because I knew I kind of understood the language of accounting. And my father was like, why don't you try to get a CPA license? So I was like, okay, maybe I'll try that. But the moment I decided that I'm going to commit to accounting was during the Haas transfer orientation. I learned that you need to be CPA eligible by the time you graduate, meaning you have to finish 150 semester units. So I was like, okay, I can't be wishy-washy with this. I have to either commit or not. And so I kind of just committed, and I was like, I need to do 150 units by the time I graduate in the next 2 years. And so I think that was my first step. And then after that, I was all through networking, trying to figure out, okay, what can I do with an accounting degree? And I personally am going into auditing, and I was so drawn by the fact that you're going into other businesses, other big companies, and learning about all their business processes, how they, recognize revenue, like where do their expenses go? Like to me, that's really exciting. And it's just, not only do you get to work on one company, but it's always different. So I can talk more about that later, but that is how I started to, really be drawn to accounting.
Thank you, Grace. So Matt, I know that you did something different in the tech sector for your internship, but then with full-time you switched to consulting. Can you share a little bit of your journey and thinking process of choosing between different career options?
Yeah, for sure. I had a little bit of tech experience before coming into Berkeley. So I worked for a few years after high school before I came back to community college. So I was kind of like set on like, oh, this is like a very convenient next step, right? Like if I have tech experience, then like recruit tech, and then it'll be like an easier ramp into like some of the bigger name companies. But when I was deciding between, okay, if I make this switch from tech to consulting, the big value statement for me was more about like breadth versus depth, which is kind of like a buzz phrase that you hear a lot, but I do think it's really valid. So for example, if you go straight into a tech role, like an operating like role as an undergraduate, like you're not going to be necessarily like steering Google search, if that makes sense. But going into consulting, you have the opportunity to not necessarily do that, but you get to talk to the people who advise those companies on doing that kind of a process. So for me, it was like, okay, do I want to am I purely set on this exact role in the company? Like, do I love the role? Do I love the company? If I do, then tech sounds like a great choice. If you get a marketing role at a company you love in tech, for sure go. But if you have a little bit of indecisiveness, okay, I don't know if I want to do this long term, consulting provides that value statement. Like, you don't have to yet. And like, we'll train you on many different industries, many different types of functions. And it kind of gives you a little bit more time to find that thing that keeps you up at night. Like, oh, I have to make this change. So I feel like consulting, there's like two sides of the coin. One is that it gives you a lot of breadth, and the other side, it gives you a lot of specific experience that's not necessarily available in every single type of operating role at a tech company. If you do have something that's like a burning passion of yours, and like there's a tech company that you really, really love, like, to be very transparent, if I got a role at Khan Academy, I would have went to Khan Academy because I was like, oh, I love Khan Academy, but I wasn't able to get it. So, it's kind of an interesting dilemma, and I'll get off my soapbox there, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And I know you just started with Bain, but can you share a little bit about your kind of first impression about working in consulting? What is the enjoyable and less enjoyable part of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So starting off with bad news first, I think one of the big expectation checks that you'll find when you start in consulting is that, and this is kind of across the board for all undergraduate positions, just to set context, is you're given a sales pitch of usually the types of things that you'll do 5 to 10 years later in the line. So for example, for consulting, that would mean you're going to directly talk to CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and tell them what to do. And you're doing that indirectly, but it's not like me and the CEO of Google in the room and I'm telling him what he's done wrong this past quarter. It's more of the partners and the higher level people who do that conversation, but you're creating all of the insights and research and developing the answers to the question. That's the expectation check that I would call like a con. Similarly, you could put that same context into like engineering. Like, if you get an entry-level software engineering job at Google, you won't be building the new search 2.0. Like, you'll be doing something on a smaller scale. So for the pros, and something that I didn't necessarily expect as much, is the access to people who have done things that create them as like an intangible asset to you. By that I mean, like, a quick example. For me, when I'm like creating this PowerPoint deck that I've been creating this past week, I had this guy who was like the CMO of these past 3 huge companies pop in on my team, and he's just in the Zoom call just with me, helping me deck, and like I can ask him any ad hoc questions that I want. And that's the type of experience that I didn't necessarily expect would be so available, but it definitely is a huge value. So for example, think about the, X tech company that you really love, and imagine being able to talk to the CEO about how you're going to build this next presentation together. These are the kind of like small moments that really made me feel like, wow, I'm lucky to be here.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess this a bit of a pleasant surprise. So Franklin, you're also with consulting. Can you share how your internship experience looked like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess in terms of, I can also start with like the least enjoyable part. And it definitely, I would say, is similar to what Matt mentioned, in that in like the analyst position, there are definitely, like, I would say, I guess you could call them mundane, but like smaller tasks that you are like largely in part of, or in charge of. So like, for example, maybe you're in charge of taking notes on like all of the calls and formatting those notes and making sure that those notes are like super readable, and synthesizing key takeaways out of your like call notes. Or maybe you're in charge of like moving those key takeaways onto particular slides and like a really long deck. And I would say that like over the course of the summer, like I can see how this could get like just like feel super like granular and tedious. But like conversely, I would say that one of the, like, as like an analyst, one of the pros that I've seen to this job is like how like fascinating and like really rewarding it is to slowly see those like individual dots you're kind of drawing with like your key insights and in your notes and your decking and whatever, like slowly start to see those come together to like form a cohesive picture, and like kind of like slowly begin to see the dots connect in that way. Excuse me. But yeah, and like that's manifested as well through really great access to I'm so sorry. like managers on my team, like being willing to take the time to like every like few hours or like, you know, several times a day, after a couple of calls, like have a conversation with me and like talk to me about like what we're hearing on the calls and what we think the implications of that, and of like those insights are on like whatever emerging hypotheses we may be having on the case, and like being directly integrated into that type of like case cracking and like that type of strategic thinking is what drew me to consulting in the first place. And I'm really like thankful that and like relieved that that is very much something that like you have like at least like input into and like a part of even at like the lowest levels, like an intern level.
Thank you, Franklin. So Brian and Cinderlina, I have this stereotype that working in investment banking is like long hours, and then you know you have to be super detail oriented in fixing those PowerPoint and presentations. So is that true, or can you share a little bit more about what the actual investment banking work look like?
Yeah, for sure. So I will say that there is a lot of truth to those stereotypes. I definitely see over here in New York that my hours are longer than the other Berkeley kids that are also here. And it does suck sometimes. Sometimes you have to miss out on hanging out with your friends on the weekends or exploring the city because you have a pitch due on Monday and you can't really do anything about it. So it's hard sometimes. I will say though, 80 to 100 hours, maybe it's the bank that I'm at. I think that's a bit of a stretch. Some days I'm working till like 9, 10 p.m. Other days I get off at like 7, 8. Fridays, depending on the Friday, can be earlier. So it's not the worst ever, but definitely detail oriented is huge. You really do have to have an eye for those things. That's something that I've been learning a lot this summer. But the great thing is, as an intern, you do have a grace period for learning. So you want to be all these things, but they know that day one, you're going to be very far from that because you're fresh out of your junior year of college. You know, you're doing a completely different line of work when you're in school versus at an internship. Another great thing is that they train you. So you really do learn a lot, everything that you need to know. There's really, you know, all you need to be is, I guess, likable in terms of the dynamics of the team. And that's kind of what they have the interview process for, is to vet the meshing of the personalities. But there are some pros too. There are lots of pros. You meet lots of great people. I've heard amazing stories about deals going through and the kind of people that the seniors at my bank are in contact with. And it's a whole world. It's an entire different ecosystem that you get exposed to. So yes, you put in the long hours, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel as well.
Great, thank you. Brian, you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm not going to try my best not to be repetitive at all, but I do feel like a lot of other industries also work similar, comparable hours, but are just not often as talked about. It's just that, you know, like investment banking is always just like glorified for, you know, crazy hours. But in my opinion, I feel like a lot of different industries and different roles right now are so competitive with so many intelligent people constantly trying to break into them that they're also working, you know, insane hours. But from my personal experience in Houlihan Lokey, I think that the longest I've stayed here was probably 3 in the morning on one of those nights, but that's probably more a reflection of me not understanding my work as quickly, and that I needed to stay a little longer just to get a better grasp on what I was doing. And because it really depends on kind of the team that you're in, but a lot of your summer analyst positions are very competitive in terms of your return offers. And so it's not really about, oh, I got to stay the hours because I got to pretend to read the Wall Street Journal, but more so I got to stay the hours because I really got to grasp what I'm doing. And if you really are not kind of with it, you will get found out very quickly, and that would kind of lead to you not getting a return offer, which is, you know, possibly the biggest nightmare, because then you have to re-recruit again, which is brutal. But it's that kind of is my experience, in that, like, you know, the hours are kind of a result of me kind of taking a little bit longer to grasp material. And it's very traditional too. As an industry, it's very traditional, and so a lot of people are very fixed in their ways, and that you can't really say, well, the the workbook shouldn't be like 26 sheets large. We can just shrink it down to 5 and make our lives a lot easier. And you can kind of see it that way. And it'll be like, no, it's just not happening. It's just been done like that for a long time. And, we kind of need all 26 of them in there. So you got to do it. And so some of those areas are a little bit frustrating, but once you get the hang of it, you'll definitely be a lot quicker, and you shouldn't be staying at 3 every single day. And there's a problem with your understanding. But yeah, that's my experience.
Great, that's kind of relieving. So Jalen, working in private equity must be a little bit different than investment banking. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think it's often misconstrued that in the buy side, your hours are a little less than in investment banking. But from what I've heard from a lot of my mentors and friends, I think the hours are similar. They're around the same. But I think the thing that people like on the buy side is that they have more transparency into what the hours are going to look like that week. So one of my friends that's working at Carlisle told me that like he knows going into the week if he's going to be working 100 hours that week or 80 hours. And I think that's a lot more sustainable for him from his perspective, because he was saying that, he just has this like clear thought that, okay, I'm going to be working this amount of hours this week, as opposed to investment banking where things can pop up at any moment. And, your whole weekend is just ruined because of that. So I think that's the biggest difference between the two. But I think that the hours are still pretty similar. I think the biggest difference is just like knowing what you're getting yourself into for that like upcoming week.
Great, thank you. So Grace, you talk a little bit about working in accounting, and then I believe there may be some, misunderstanding about accounting, how tedious it is. And can you share your internship experience with us to kind of demystify a little bit?
Yeah, so I think the tedious portion is somewhat correct, but I do think it's different per person. For me, I think I'm a little less detail oriented than I should be, but I do believe that I will be trained and I will learn to, catch all those numbers. But I did my internship last year when they did a short virtual one. So I was on a client for 2 weeks, and for those entire 2 weeks, I spent trying to bring this variance. Like they had this balance sheet, and something didn't match up. They had like a $10 million variance, and my task was to bring it down to 300K. And so I had to like go through all the Excel parts, Excel formulas, and it was so hard, I would say, but I did ask for help. And I think for me, the reason I enjoyed it the most is because the senior that I was working with, she told me how this tedious task plays into this huge role, and kind of like how, I can't remember who mentioned it earlier, I think it's Franklin, like you see the big picture and like somebody has to do this work, right? And it's most likely going to be the intern or the staff who's like just starting. But once I realized that, okay, this is a really big deal, and people, above me on with it, the work got exciting. Once you know the purpose of what you're doing, it gets a little better. And yeah, it was pretty entertaining, although at first it was pretty stressful.
Thank you. So I know we still would like to save some time for audience to ask questions. So I'm going to kind of combine with my questions. Let's talk about recruiting. I know that some of you already mentioned it before. But I know right now it's the time. So investment banking is pretty much kind of wrapping up. But let's talk about consulting first. As this year, consulting has a little changes that originally they were recruiting in early September. But then this year, some firms did add a July deadline. So we would like to talk about the consulting recruiting process. Matt and Franklin, can you share with us about kind of the timeline and then what resources that you find helpful in the whole process?
Yeah, for the consulting recruiting timelines, usually you'll find that if you break the consulting firms into like a few tiers, like some of the tiers like that compete with each other, they will recruit in a similar timeline, right? So like Deloitte and like PwC will have like similarly matching timelines because they're competing for talent. And these tend to be like, like as Karen was saying, like in September, in October even. But we're seeing a lot of the timelines being pushed forward a little bit, just because of what's happened with COVID and like how they have like bigger staffing needs now. So for example, Bain is hiring a lot of full-time people and like a lot of interns this year. And they created 2 full-time application timelines, one in July, as Karen was alluding to, and then one that's still, I think, in September. And I believe the internship, which is most relevant for 2023 transfers, would be September as well, if I'm not mistaken. But the recruiting process will take a few weeks. There's usually 2 rounds. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with case interviews, the term, not necessarily being experts at them, but the term of case interviewing. For most consulting, I would assume that there are going to be case interviews in all the rounds. So I would walk into it with that assumption, and that assumption means that there's kind of 2 goals that you need to solve for. The first one is getting a first round interview, and the second one is winning the offer. The first phase of getting the actual first round interview is the most ambiguous. That's the one where people are like, oh, my uncle works at McKinsey, or like, like there's a lot of roundabout ways. Do I put my CC on my resume? Do I not? My friend didn't, and he got an interview, so I'm not. These are going to be a lot more convoluted, and the advice that you get, you'll kind of have to all take with a grain of salt, because just like how we don't necessarily know exactly why we got accepted as a transfer to Haas, people who get these jobs don't really know that that's what worked. They assume that if they took their CC off their resume, that that's why they got the interview, but they don't really know. So I would take people's advice with a grain of salt. And then I would solve for the first phase by leveraging networking, leveraging events like this, really being present, and making sure that you're presenting a very good package to the application. By package, I mean like your transcript, the resume, cover letter, and this part is, the complicated part that, you can all hit me up offline to get some advice on that. I don't want to go too deep, but that part is one section. And then the second section is going to be actually performing the interviews. And luckily, this is a much more robotic, training, right? You read the case interview books that everyone's reading. There's no secrets. Do repetitions with yourself and ideally with other people. But this is something that you can kind of solve for in a more robotic manner. The first phase of getting the actual first round interview, you're going to hear a lot of magic and spells. And I talked to this person, and you need to present yourself like this, or change your LinkedIn profile picture. Like, you're going to hear a lot of this. I would try to solve for that with most of your energy, but also don't forget that if you do get the first round interview, they might interview the next week. And if it's your first time practicing casing at that point, you might have done all that work and not been prepared. So it's hard, but I would simultaneously prepare for case interviews by doing repetitions with your friends and yourself, reading the books that everyone's talking about. And I think there's free PDFs on like the pre-record Google Drive, or ask Sloan for it. And then solve for the phase 1 by networking, talking to more people, hitting people like me and Franklin up offline. And we can help guide you there. But like I was saying before, unfortunately, just like how there's no silver bullet to like get into Haas, you're only going to hear what people thought worked for them. So high level applications are going to be in August, September. Start networking to get those first rounds, write a good resume, cover letter, and then also don't think that you can start prepping for cases when you get the interview, because you'll hear this a lot. Like, well, I'm not going to case prep unless I get an interview. Then they get the interview and they have never case prep, and then they're in this sticky situation. So that is my perspective on that. Franklin, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered most of it. I guess like the only thing I'd add is that given when the internship recruiting cycle is, like, again, like kind of September-ish, early September, that pretty much means that if you are like interested in pursuing it seriously, you pretty much need to start like right now. And I think, and like it is like, I would say a big commitment in that, it's like, it's a book you have to read, and it's a lot of time you have to set aside in order to do so. And so like, that's why I would like urge you to like really consider if you're like willing to make that commitment, and basically start like preparing ASAP, because once school starts, you're going to want to acclimate yourself to the campus and, perform well in your classes, and like things will, like, your schedule will fill out very quickly. And I know that like a lot of you are probably busy with pre-core and perhaps like internships or jobs right now. But I do think that like an ideal scenario is one in which you're showing up to campus in August, already being very familiar with the casing process and feeling relatively practiced, and are in the stage where you are not like building out the fundamentals of casing, but rather refining your casing into like interview ready, like into an interview ready state. And to make that a little bit more tangible, I think that if I were recruiting like for internships right now, I would be aiming for, and you'll hear a lot of different numbers here, but like personally, I think that like 20 to 30 cases of practice is I think a good goal to set like right now, like if you were starting right now, but with the caveat that like that doesn't mean like necessarily just like running a case and then like moving on and never thinking about it again. I think that like a really important piece of that is like after doing a case, really discussing with the person that was interviewing you, like their feedback and understanding like in which ways you could have improved, and maybe even just like rethinking through the entire case and like how you would have done it again differently. And also to in any way possible, like seeing if you can get not only your peers to like help you case and get repetitions in, but also like people that are older than you or are current consultants or have interned before, because they likely have like more crystallized ideas of like what a like perfect case like might look like, which is itself like not really the thing because it's pretty subjective. But anyway, like basically having more experienced people can really help you accelerate your progress in that regard as well. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about that.
Great, thank you, Franklin. So now let's talk about investment banking. I know that right now a lot of firms are kind of wrapping up, but not all firms has already finished. So Brian and Sandalina, would you like to talk about how your recruiting experience looked like? And then I know that you mentioned about networking, coffee chats. It's definitely very critical in investment banking, but what other resources that you think students need to know?
All right. Okay, there's a lot, as it goes for any other career field, especially the ABCs. Lots of networking. I know I sound like a broken record. Everybody said it, but really cannot reiterate this enough. At my bank, at least, every single intern had networked their way into the bank. People that just put in a cold application, I heard they didn't even get first round interviews. So it is incredibly important to make sure that your name is known, that your personality is known, that your face is seen, even if it's through the Zoom screen. Think of it as a numbers game. Statistically, the more people you reach out to, the more you cast a wide net, broaden your outreach, the more likely it is that you will find that one offer is all it takes for you to have an internship. So if you reach out to 10 people, you're asking for a 10% chance. If you reach out to like 200, 300 people, the odds are going to be more and more in your favor that one person somewhere will come through. So yeah, you want to start doing that. It is nice to have your LinkedIn cleaned up and everything, because when you ask for coffee chats, that is the first thing that people are going to look at. It is not the most important thing, as Matt kind of talked about, but it's definitely something to consider. You want to make sure you know your technicals. Now, this is a common mistake. People love to memorize and regurgitate the 400 question guide by, Breaking into Wall Street. That's not what you want to do. You want to make sure you understand all of the concepts thoroughly, because everybody knows about the 400 questions. So they will go beyond the scope of those 400 questions. And when you can answer the 3 questions from the guide perfectly, but then the 4th question comes and you freeze like a deer in the headlights, that's not a good look. They want people that really understand what they're talking about, not parrots that repeat back what they're hearing. So that is definitely another part of it. As I mentioned before, you just really have to keep pushing. You cannot, there's something to be said about the competitive nature at Berkeley. It is really easy to drown yourself out in the noise and assume that you're not good enough and look at people's LinkedIn updates and think, oh, I don't have that, I'm not going to get that. You will if you keep pushing. Also, I will add, I interviewed in October. I'm a little bit of an oddball. I know we just talked about how banking wraps up really early, but there is hope. I was networking with a specific bank in September and interviewed in October. So it is possible. I did start in June, but it took me that long to build an actual network that amounted to that one connection that led to this internship. pretty sure there's more, but Brian, you take it away.
Yeah, I definitely think that for anyone who's trying to go into banking, it's super important to understand what the timeline looks like for different types of banks. So I'm sure we said it multiple times today that it's so accelerated. I think the first kind of interview that I started seeing happen was sometime in February with Citi. And so you have a bank like Citi open up in February, for example, and everyone else is just struggling to, well, not struggling, but like everyone's scrambling to kind of open up at the same time because they're afraid of the talent getting taken away. And so if you're a transfer student, it's really tough if you don't kind of extend that semester like what Jalen and I briefly talked about, because by the time you kind of go through Sloan's class, which you are going through right now, and you go for your first class in the fall, it's kind of all wrapped up. So as we speak right now, if we're talking like end of July, starting of August, the only kind of bank that is about to get started is probably Centerview, and everyone else is done. Everyone else is done. Like the latest is probably like Goldman, and Goldman opened up in 1st of July, and everyone else was way before that. So it's really important to kind of understand the timeline really well. You don't want to show up for a race, you know, on Monday that was run on Sunday. It's like the worst feeling ever. So it's not even a question about your competency at that point, because you could have studied everything, but you really missed the boat. So understanding the timeline is super important. The technicals for sure. I think that's kind of like the minimum. Like, you know, it's like your 4.0 coming into Haas. If you needed that to, you know, even kind of be considered, and that's like the prerequisite, and then everything else is above and beyond how you communicate and all of your networking opportunities. In terms of like networking, like just for a scale in your head, you should look to kind of expect to talk to anywhere between like 100 to 150 people. And that sounds like kind of crazy right now. It sounds wild, but as long as you have that sort of expectation in your head, you kind of know what you're setting yourself up for. So that's kind of the ballpark amount of people that, you know, we've all spoken to. And I think last point or like tip that I would give that is super duper helpful is to really have a group, right? And I think the same could be said with consulting. You need to have a group of guys or like, you know, people that you trust a lot to share information about which banks open up, which banks closes, you know, what are some of your interview questions, even if your friend's not that interested, and really just constantly mocking. So like, for example, like in consulting, you know, you do cases together. In banking, it's really just about mock interviews after mock interviews, like almost on a daily. So you got to kind of do an hour of that every single day, which I did with Jalen. And we really like psyched each other up and like, you know, got each other like ready for each interview, and just exchange information. Because like the tough thing about banking, sorry not to go on for too long, is when the banks kind of open up, you don't know. Like they don't tell you, like no one tells you it's up, and it's kind of like you show up and it's like, oh, it's already been up for like 2 days and it's over, right? Like, so Goldman gets like 200,000 applicants a year. So like Sandalina said, like it's, if you don't know someone in there, your resume could be like 4.0 and you could have graduated like Harvard, MIT, and it'll just never like see the light of day. And so, you know, you really got to get like kind of ahead of the curve and have people you trust, and like, you know, they'll tell you like, hey, this just opened up and that just opened up, and like it's just not public information. And so, you know, like kind of leaning on those people are super important. Obviously, like, you know, add your own value, because you don't want to just you know, like rely on other people's information. But that's kind of a tip that I would give.
Really quickly, I just wanted to add something that I forgot to mention, bouncing off of Brian's point. One huge thing for me was that I joined this program called Wall Street Mastermind. If you haven't heard about it, please look it up. But basically, it's a really great network of students from all over the country that kind of come together for investment banking, mentored by Sam Shia. Would definitely look into it. And yeah, I can talk more about it later if anybody has questions.
Great, thank you. So Jalen, private equity is a relatively niche area that I'm sure it's kind of less on-campus recruiting experience. You pretty much get to it through a lot of networking. So can you share your recruiting experience with us?
Yeah, so it's great that you bring that up, because for someone like me, when I went through the recruitment process, you know, I think it's very important, first of all, to cast a wide net. So even though I ended up in private credit, I still recruited for investment banking. And then the whole way that like I found out about this opportunity and where I got my internship at BC Partners was through the club that I actually joined. And and this was through the club that I joined called Berkeley Finance Club. That's where I found out about the opportunity. And I think that, clubs are definitely something that are very important. Is someone drawing on this?
Sure, what's going on? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So I found out about this opportunity from my club, which was from Berkeley Finance Club, because we had a previous alumni that joined, that was a part of the firm that I joined, and she was working in private credit, and that was the entire way where I found out about this internship opportunity. So if it wasn't for my club, I wouldn't have heard about this opportunity in general. So I think it's really important that once you do get to Berkeley as an incoming junior, that you do try to join different clubs and meet different people, because it will just open your net a lot further. So if anyone is interested in Berkeley Finance Club, feel free to reach out to me or Brian as well.
Thank you, Jalen. And Grace, do you have final thoughts about your recruiting experience?
Yeah, for sure. I think just starting from August, there's a lot of info sessions, networking events, and then in September, your applications are due, and then in October, it's mostly interviews. But I do want to add on to the resources. You do have Haas designated career counselors that could look over your resume, your cover letters. There's also mock interviews at the Career Center that you can utilize. I think they're specifically for Haas students, so that really helped me kind of start thinking about how to answer interview questions. And then lastly, if you're interested in getting your CPA or going into a role that needs a CPA later down the line, I would recommend talking to Connie. She is the one who will look over your transcript and make sure that you're on your way to the 150 units, because on your resume you can write like a line that says CPA eligible until for me it was May 2021. So I would recommend.
Thank you, Grace. So students, you guys can start asking questions. Sorry, we only have like 5 minutes left, but I hope that you already get essential informations, and please forget I think there is a Zoom bombers. That's my first time running into things like this. Please ignore that. And then if you can type your questions, or you would like to just turn on your microphone, feel free to do so. And if you want to ask a specific panelist questions, please go ahead. So Jeremy did ask, what is the best way to reach out to you?
Mark, I think that's a really good question. Before I had a Haas GPA, I tried not to recruit too heavily because I felt like I wouldn't be taken too seriously from different places. I guess it depends where you're applying, but I do find that it is a bit harder to just like kind of sell like, oh, this is my CC GPA, but I'm at Berkeley now. But I think for the time being, if you are going to recruit, I think it would just be really helpful to just put like UC Berkeley on the top and then your community college at the bottom and have your CC GPA there as well.
Thank you, Dylan. Any other questions?
So I got a question privately, but I think it would be helpful for everybody to join in and answer as well. It was basically about the process of joining elite clubs on campus as a transfer and how that kind of impacts recruiting. Everybody's going to have a different take on this, but my answer, and everybody please feel free to chime in, is that I actually didn't join any, because I knew that the amount of time that it would take me to recruit for those clubs coming in as a transfer would just take away time that I would need to recruit for an internship. I think those clubs are super great. There are people on this call that are in them and it worked for them. But for me, I just couldn't justify spending that much time because I also had an internship last summer, pre-core, other classes and recruiting going on. I will also say that these orgs are great, but I think they will benefit you the most if you come in as an underclassman, because it gives the club a couple years to really teach you the ins and outs of networking. But I'm sure that, you know, the experience might be a little bit rushed coming in as a junior, but probably still great. Hopefully other people can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think clubs are important, but kind of echoing what you were saying is I wouldn't let it take the priority away from your internship or full-time recruiting. So if you had to pick between two, like definitely pick the internship or recruiting than the club recruiting. And I think what you'll find is that there probably will be no harm done if you say I'm going to recruit for clubs in the spring and maybe try your shot at a few in the fall, but don't overly stress out about it. I would definitely prioritize the job portion if that's what you are here for, though. Because there are people who, like, you know, want the whole, like, you know, experience. They're not as like super career focused. Like, I need to get this job. So definitely, like, you know, use your own perspective there. But if your goal is to get an internship, I would prioritize internship recruiting, and then once you get one solidified for the next summer, then be like, okay, what clubs are still open? Or say like, oh, the one I really want to join is opening up in the spring. I'll apply that. But yeah, definitely echoing what you were saying.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, like, if you have a particular industry that you're really interested in, I think that it can be a great way to like dive deeper and meet more people that are interested in that particular industry. And, you know, I also think that it can provide you more experiences, like with regard to that industry, to talk about in interviews, which is a plus. Like for example, like if you've never had like a consulting internship, it's useful to be able to talk about like some student consulting experience you've had, like if you, for example, decided to join a student consulting club. But again, echoing both Sandalina and Matt in that, like, at the end of the day, like an internship or like a professional opportunity is much higher impact than any type of club would be. So I think that if it's something that you can manage in the fall, like, more power to you. But also to, like, I think in fact, I know every club has a spring recruiting cycle that would be equally as, like, great an opportunity for you to take advantage of.
Thanks, Franklin. Any final questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
All right, go ahead, Mark.
I have a question for the investment bankers. I was wondering, getting into investment banking, did you have an idea that you want to stay within the field, or using it for the exit opportunities to get out? Or maybe did you come in with one idea and now you've changed your mind?
This is a fun question. Honestly, I'm still figuring it out. I know this is, again, more on a personal level, but I know that one day in my life, I want a family and kids. And I know that maybe the investment banking hours aren't going to be sustainable for me forever, all the way through my 40s and all that. So I don't think this is a forever thing for me, but maybe if I really like this bank, get a full-time offer, the hours are doable, the more senior you get, who knows? I will also say the exit opportunities were a huge pull for me. So yeah, I guess we'll just see where the wind takes me, but right now it just doesn't seem sustainable for life.
Brian, you want to add anything?
Nothing specifically for me, but I think that it's pretty timely as well, because my managing director and my director, Yuka and John, have joined us into this call for the next segment. But we're not going to transition just yet. But, you know, if you have any questions regarding what a career looks like in this line of work, yeah, you know, you can feel free to stay around and direct your questions towards them, because they'll be more than well equipped to answer questions of that nature, because, you know, spent a long time with Julian and Loki. But yeah, we can keep at it with this program first.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So so now it's 7 p.m. already. So I'd like to thank all our 6 amazing panelists, thank you so much for joining us today. And sorry.
I have a quick question.
All right, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, like, I have really bad anxiety. If I wanted to, like, relieve my stress by smoking marijuana, would I be able to do that in the past?
I'm not sure this